I understand that there is a sort of a project of weekly Dogen dive. Is that right? Something like that? Well, when Galen invited me, she just invited me. And then I got an email that said, number 4, or in your book, number 38. So this particular fascicle has come up on the hit list. It's body and mind study of the way. So, you can't parse a whole Dogen fascicle in, I don't know, apparently 15 hours, which is what Kokyo did. But it's nice to dive in and see how it relates to our lives and how we can use Dogen's encouragement to relieve our own suffering, to bring peace into the world like that. So Shinjin Gakudo, body and mind, Shinjin and Gakudo, learning the truth or practice of the way, body and mind study of the way. For me, Dogen takes up in this fascicle many of his beloved themes. And those of us that are even somewhat familiar with Dogen will recognize, and I'll do a little bit of reading from parts of it and then talk about it. It seems to be, this fascicle, a poem of love to the study of the way, to just practice, to aspiration. Actually, I think the title of this talk might be Arousing the Aspiration for Enlightenment, because that's the thing that kept coming through his words. So I am back in Texas after 50 years of living all over the place, mostly California and Montana, but I grew up in Texas, and I'm back to be with family, which is a kind of continuous practice. It is. It's good. And then I also was invited to be the guiding teacher at San Antonio Zen Center, which some of you I know are familiar with. I trained at Green Gulch Farm and at Berkeley. And then I spent a long time in Bozeman, Montana, trying to beat them into my Zen ways. Like, do the service this way, do that. And, we're not a monastery, right? We're not a monastery here, we're not there. But there's something about bringing these practices, these forms into our lives that both relax us and organize us. And they help me with my daily ritual of making coffee and walking the dog and like that. So it is connected. Last weekend in San Antonio, I spoke of Martin Luther King because we had just, I think his day was coming up, and then we did the march on the 20th, which was really, really cold. But I wanted to honor him and continue to honor him because of the teaching of the beloved community and the principle of nonviolence. And I just want to mention him to bring this into the room, the principle of non-harm. In Sanskrit, ahimsa, non-harm. And we visited his principles a little bit, but some of the comments on the principles I think are appropriate for this past week, these past few months. Regardless of your orientation or your politics, you're all welcome here. Every view is welcome. And I know it's a fraught time. The outcome of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. And nonviolence recognizes that evildoers are also victims and are not evil people. So I just wanted to put that in the room as we investigate body and mind study of the way. I think everyone wants to be included, especially in this practice, but it's a time to really take care of ourselves and each other and extend kindness wherever you can. And this is me talking to myself now, monitor the diet of news you take in. Just find out what's going on and maybe call it a day and not listen to everyone's response, and see if you can monitor your own body and mind with everything that's going on. So my question is always, how does any particular teaching, nonviolence, Dogen's study of mind and body, help us? It's wonderful to investigate these, what sometimes seems like very lofty teachings, but what do they have to do with me? That's always my question. So this fascicle, for those of you that are not familiar, and if you're not familiar with Dogen, he is one of our great ancestors bringing Zen, Soto Zen, to Japan from China in the 13th century. And he's beloved in the Zen world, but even after I'd been practicing for quite a while, I asked my teacher, Sojin, I said, this Dogen, is he really such a big deal? He just looked at me as if I had, yes, it was like, okay, I'll get busy. But I'm not an expert. So I am with you in studying this. But this fascicle, and I'm learning, contains lots of references to ancestors, to stories, to different imagery that can also wash over you if you don't know what they refer to, and you can just take it in, or you can like look up every little reference and go, oh, that's what he means. Oh, that's what he means. It's not as esoteric as it seems. Either way, Dogen has something to offer us. So here's Dogen. Without practice, the Buddha way cannot be attained. Without study, it remains remote. Nanyue Zen Master Da Hui said, it is not that there is no practice and no realization. It is just that they cannot be divided. So this brings up Dogen's great phrase of practice realization, practice verification, that they go together. I'm really bad at following my own notes, so stay with me. It's radical to me to consider that we don't practice to get enlightened. And if that's news for some of you, it's true. Not just because we're already have or are Buddha nature, but because without practice, we can't sort of bring it into the world. We can't extend it. We can't offer it. We can't embody it. So it just remains an idea, or maybe some moment you had, but what about your life? What about my life? All preceding and succeeding Buddhas, without exception, practice the Buddha way. So among Dogen's many teachings, I see this constant theme of practice. And it helps us to stabilize and to celebrate and to be at one with our true nature. And this is regardless of how you think about things or how you feel. So in that way, we're protected. We've been talking about Zazen in San Antonio, oddly enough, and I wanted to quote my good friend Heather. She's becoming my good friend, who's a longtime Zen student, and she gave this wonderful sort of some capping phrases on some instruction I had given about Zazen. And she said that breath is the most intimate interface between mind and body, that the breath is a little window onto the relative and absolute, the inside and the outside, the infinite and the finite, limited. By studying the self in your breath, you will eventually naturally realize no self. When we are able to sit together in the Zendo, it's easier to see that there's no boundary, absolutely none, between this breath and that, mine and yours, or between your breath and some caveman's, or even between our breath and the outer reaches of the known universe. The tissues your body uses to exchange molecules as you breathe are literally the product of the burning stars in faraway galaxies. Isn't that great? The breath we are asking you to observe or be with is literally the entire universe breathing itself in and out, and yet different every time. And at the same time, it's limited because when I breathe, you don't get oxygen. I do. So I thought this was a lovely sort of reminder. It's not just that it's not just that we're interconnected with all things, it's that all things have come forth in this, in that. So it's even, I think the phrase I've been contemplating recently is in the robe chant, a field far beyond form and emptiness. We've been trying to just understand form and emptiness, but this is a field far beyond. So interconnectedness, emptiness, yes, and the universe coming forth as you, as me, as the street, as the fascicle will say, walls, tiles, and pebbles. In this fascicle body and mind study of the way, Dogen does not give us practical instructions like he does in the Fukan Zazengi, which is his essential principles for Zazen. And that one already is half poetry as it is. But here he's not reminding us to be mindful or to breathe or how to practice in one way. There seems to be no toolkit, and a lot of us like toolkits. He's reminding us of shikantaza, of just existing, just sitting, just being alive. But he does say about practice. And this is one little bit of the fascicle that is not repeated, but I really love it. Binding the self with no rope. Mind has the power to attract a pearl, and the ability to be a pearl in water. Some days the pearl is melted, sometimes it is crushed. There are times when this pearl is reduced to extremely fine powder. We all know some of these states. Nishijima Roshi, who also did a big translation of the Shobo Genzo, I wanted to see how he translated that, and he said, practice is dragging through the mud and staying in the water. It is binding oneself without rope, which he says suggests endurance and self-restraint in mundane daily behavior. This is very good help. It helps me because in the Zendo, with all of you doing the right thing, I can do the right thing. But when I'm alone, if I remember binding myself without rope, it's not as restrictive as it sounds. It's kind of an inspiration to contain myself. So when the impulse to fly away and react comes up, can bind myself without rope. I think it's a wonderful instruction. It's a Dogen instruction. We can unpack that. You guys can unpack that later. Even though this fascicle is like an homage to aspiration and faith, and Dogen does talk a lot about faith, which I think is so great because he's very formidable to me. And if I keep bonking this, I'm sorry to those of you who might be going, but he talks about faith so much in his Eihei Koso Hotsuganmon, his vow. He talks about the true mind of faith, the true body of faith. So in a way, there's another part. I'll read this. For the time being, let's say there are two approaches to studying the Buddha way, to study with mind and to study with the body. To study with mind means to study with various aspects of mind, consciousness, emotion, intellect. We all know different states of mind with which we study ourselves. After resonating with the way and arousing the aspiration for enlightenment, take refuge in the great way of Buddha ancestors and devote yourself to the practice of way-seeking mind. I love this because he's not saying be enlightened, he's saying want to be enlightened. which is almost better. Even if you have not yet aroused the way-seeking mind, follow the examples of Buddha ancestors who did arouse the way-seeking mind in former times. This tells me why we dedicate what we're doing to the ancestors, because they did it and they are convinced we can do it too. Sometimes you study the way by casting off the mind. Sometimes you study the way by taking up the mind, says Dogen. Either way, I know this is a lot of paper, but it's large font and I crossed out most of it. Sometimes you study the way by casting off the mind, let go, let it flow by. Sometimes you study the way by taking up the mind. What's going on? Investigation. What is this about? What can I learn from this? How can I be present with it? Either way, study the way with thinking and study the way not thinking. He's giving us every opportunity. There's no way to fail. I have until 10:15. Is that right? Ish.
Or later.
Okay, so everyday mind, here's another one. And everyday mind means to maintain everyday mind in this world or in any world. Yesterday goes forth from this moment, and today comes forth from this place. We're doing it all. We're doing it all. We're constructing it all. So we can also deconstruct it, especially when it's tough. While going, the boundless sky goes, and while coming, the entire earth comes. So it's not only are you not separate, it is you, the universe coming forth. This is everyday mind. And as Nansen says, it's as vast as outer space. I was given the koan everyday mind as the way several times in my life by different teachers. So it was clearly they were seeing something that needed some help. And I used to focus on ordinary mind. But then I focused on the part where it says, it's as vast as outer space. How could it be about right and wrong? That came to me only recently after 40 years. Okay, so even though you do not know it, says Dogen, if you arouse the aspiration for enlightenment, you will move forward on the way of enlightenment. The moment is already here. Do not doubt it in the least. Do not doubt it in the least. And yet, even if you should doubt it, this is nothing but everyday mind. So again, although we say there's no way to win, right? At life, there's no way to win. Nobody gets out alive. You can't win. We're not going to get it right. It's not going to be perfect. There's no way to fail. There's no way to be apart from it. I have a memory of Galen Roshi, if I may. I was at her Shuso ceremony a bazillion years ago. And Paul Heller Roshi asked her this question. I don't know how she was so great even back then, but she was. And it took me a long time to feel like I even could approach this. But he asked her, and you know, a good question is almost better than a good response, right? A good question. He asked, what is Zazen? And so Galen did Zazen for a moment, and her response was, you can't get away from it. Think of how well we are being held. Okay, the compassionate and beautiful invitation to have faith. So, of course, Dogen has separated mind and body, which is not separate, but he gets to do that. And we're striving to realize non-separation. So we take a breath and say, okay, Dogen, what now? So to study the way with body means to study the way with your own body. This aging body, this previously yogic body. It is the study of the way using this lump of red flesh. The body comes forth from the study of the way. Everything that comes forth from the study of the way is the true human body. Okay, what do we do with this? What is he saying? How does this help us? Well, one of the ways is that to study with our own body is the faith that our body is coming forth as we study and investigate. Like when you ask the question, when you are confused, when I get the assignment, please speak about Dogen. This body and mind with that task is coming forth, is being created. It's now. It's never other than now. And again, how does that help us? How does that relieve my suffering? One thing it does for me is it relieves me of the burden of figuring everything out. Every problem I've ever had, every problem you have, every problem the world is having, I can put down and be in the present moment, because only then will I have the right, appropriate, helpful way of being. One of the questions I ask, Dogen was very big on monastic practice. He was very big on it. And he talks a lot about leaving home and entering the monastic life. And I recently heard Norman speak about that, because we're not in a monastery, he's not in a monastery. All this great Zen that is spreading throughout the West is in living rooms and, yoga studios and wherever we can meet and do our lovely forms and sit in silence and talk about Dogen. But that doesn't mean we're not in the same spirit of those who leave the home life. What does it mean to leave the home life? Are we asking you not to take care of your home and not be in your life? So I'm always thinking of that phrase, how to live in the world but not be of the world. That was Jesus, right? I remember him. We used to be very close. I think he was onto something. I think that's a really good way of thinking about how we are aligning with our ancestors, with the monastic ancestors, with the lay ancestors, with our founders, that the homeless life or not being of the world means that there's some faith that whatever it is that is manifesting, but where it comes from is something that we can, I don't know if we can know it or experience it, but we can have faith in it, that it's what's going on is a bigger deal than we think. And that can be a comfort rather than a question, to know we are part of something bigger than ourselves. My friend Lori, Alan Sinaki's wife, has as her, some people put quotes under their signature on email. Hers is a bunch of flowers, and it's a quote by Beyonce, our hero. We're part of something way bigger. Just to know that. So in practicing with the body, one of the places I'm doing that, in addition to the San Antonio Zen Center, which the Zendo is in between the entrance and the kitchen. So you're crossing into the Zendo all the time. And everybody's very good about stopping behind the altar, doing a bow, coming up from the bow and continuing. No sort of cursory sort of, yeah, altar. It's like my true nature, my true nature. Remembering our true nature, regardless of whether we understand it or feel it, all of that. So I take this practice into my sister's house, where I spend a lot of time, and it's her house. And my son is living in one room and I'm living in another room, and it's her house. And we're taking care of things, dogs and her husband and like that. And I watch, and I have this opportunity to take care of her things. And she claims she's OCD, but when she was a teenager, it was not that way. And we had to share a room. And it's kind of refreshing to see her. I think you'd be a very good Zen student, with the way she wants things. But what it means is that we are learning to live together. I've just been visiting her and my family for 50 years, but we're living together and we're respecting each other's space. And I have to tell you this, but don't tell anyone. For a long time, she has not been recycling at all. Nothing. I started a recycling program in 1973 in my high school. I was the only one doing it, but she doesn't do it. And we've all judged her for it and like that, and plastic, glass, everything. So I've started saying I could take this to the San Antonio Zen Center, wine bottles, whatever, you know. She's usually pretty. Thunder? Huh? Anyway, I have her recycling and she's doing it with this graciousness because mostly she goes, they don't recycle. It doesn't, it's a scam. And I believe her about plastic because I've seen the pictures, but I've got her recycling and she's putting it neatly over somewhere for me. And I didn't make her do it. So I'm just saying, body and mind study of the way. Okay, the last thing I want to say, because it wouldn't be Dogen if he wasn't dissing someone, right? Like he can be very judgmental. And I appreciate that about him because he had his views embedded within, you know, the universal truth of life. He would say, do not follow the mistaken views of spontaneous or natural enlightenment. At first I thought, not to study the Buddha way is to fall into the realm of outsiders and those without enlightenment. Also, those who follow this must not be like outsiders who hold this view of spontaneous enlightenment. So he's going on. Oh, one more. Bai Zhang said, if you are attached to the view that original purity and original emancipation are Buddha, or to Zen practice, if you're attached, you are a follower of the outsider's way of spontaneous enlightenment. So I was like, what is he talking about? And it just so happened that I was learning or reading about something between the Soto way and the Rinzai way, or the sort of gradual path and the sudden path. And I've always been I've loved the imagery of like enlightenment or waking up or peace of mind is like walking in a fog. You know, you walk in the fog and all of a sudden you're wet. All of a sudden you notice you're wet. So he's just said, I think what he's saying is to remember that it's like that phrase, and I'm sorry I didn't look this up, it hasn't always been there and it's not merely arising now. He's just sort of, I don't know what he's doing, but for me, what he's saying is don't worry about where it comes from. If you're working towards it or if it happens all of a sudden, it's beyond both of those things, but we need both of those things. It's like when I got the phrase, a field beyond form and emptiness, as if I had never heard it. It was like, I should think about that. I should contemplate that. But I'd been practicing with it for a long, long time. So for me, the main idea is really about, not really what I've been talking about. So I circle around to arousing the aspiration for enlightenment. I think Dogen is giving us the opportunity to just have desire in the good sense. Desire, as Sojin Roshi, my teacher, used to say, you can't have life without desire. Just don't cling to it, don't attach, don't think it means something. But this aspiration, arousing this aspiration really is like the bottom of the practice for me, the bottom, middle, and top. Just wanting to practice. So think of those days when you don't want to practice. How do we arouse the aspiration? Dogen says conditions do not arouse it. Knowledge, it does not arouse it. The aspiration for enlightenment arouses itself Thank you, Dogen. The aspiration for enlightenment arouses itself. This arousing is the aspiration for enlightenment. The aspiration for enlightenment is neither existent nor non-existent, neither wholesome nor unwholesome, nor neutral. It is not the result of past actions. Even beings in the blissful realms can arouse it. The aspiration for enlightenment arises just at the time of arising. It is not limited by conditions. However, I just want to encourage us that even though he is saying this in a sort of magical way, feels magical to me, like it just happens, we can provide the conditions for the non-conditioned or unconditioned arousal of aspiration to arise. We can do that. We can make our life sane. And then we will remember that we want to live a sane life. So I think I'm supposed to finish up pretty soon. The aspiration for enlightenment and conditions together hold out a single hand held out freely, a single hand held out in the midst of all being. I just think this is so encouraging and lovely. It's so compassionate. It's just like, it's extending itself to us all the time. It doesn't always look that way. It could be a grouchy person in the gas station, or it could be your sister really OCDing out, or it could be the news. But the hand is extended, and we can feel it in each other. Well, I was going to read this quote, but it ends on a kind of discouraging note, so I'm going to skip that one. You know, it's one of those, oh, if you do this, you'll miss it by a bazillion miles. So, you know, I'm here to help us realize it's right here, right? And he's like, you'll miss it. So in a way, Dogen's giving us a technique, and that is to practice and to arouse the aspiration for practice. He keeps talking about enlightenment, but I think he means arouse the aspiration to live an enlightened life. There are moments of enlightenment, that's great. But living an enlightened life is practice. And that's what I believe I'm doing here, or what I'm trying to do here. So I don't know if I've illuminated anything about body, and certainly not about mind, but I will end with Zen Master. I know I shouldn't be doing this at all. That's how I feel sometimes. A long time ago, one of our teachers said, I'm going to quote this thing, but I feel like I'm about to be struck by lightning. Like, who am I to be sitting in this seat? But here I am, I'm in this seat. Because if not me today, then what? So Zen Master Yuan Wu, who is our collector of the Blue Cliff Record koans, which those of you who may not be familiar with the koans, they're our stories. They are our Zen stories. He said, and this is how Dogen ends the fascicle, birth is the emergence of undivided activity. Death is the emergence of undivided activity. So filling up the great empty sky, straightforward mind is always bits and pieces, moment by moment. What's this now? So I would say I have come to the conclusion that if I were going to say anything about our true nature, it is that aspiration is our true nature.